Welcome to one of the most shocking cases ever written down in the history of the United States. Before we start, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this story. We want to know which places and what times of day or night these true stories reach. They whispered her name like a curse, though none dared speak it aloud after sunset. Some called her Cindery for the way her left eye glowed ember red when torchlight hit it. Others called her the Cane Row Widow, a ghost woman who walked barefoot through the sugar fields and left no footprints behind. But those who knew the truth, the overseers, the planters, the night riders who rode with white hoods and burning crosses, gave her another name altogether. Born a slave on the Duval plantation and worked to the bone in the blazing cane fields, the woman known as Mara learned early that survival required silence, patience, and an iron heart. She never raised her voice, never cried out, never asked for mercy. Not even the day the Klansmen dragged her husband into the shackled rows and made her watch him die. They thought she broke that night. They thought she went numb. They thought her silence meant surrender. But they were wrong. Her silence was sharpening itself. Her grief was forging itself. Her rage was biding its time. And one moonless night, when the cane rows stood tall and the riders came for their usual terror, Mara stepped out barefoot into the darkness, carrying only a sugarcane machete and a promise whispered to the dead. Before sunrise, 21 white hoods lay blood-soaked in the fields, and Mara became a legend, feared by both the living and the damned. Mara had worked the cane rows since she was 9. Long before her back bent, long before her hands blistered into permanent calluses, long before she learned the art of silence. The sugarcane fields of the Duval plantations stretched for miles. A green maze that swallowed sound and hid sins. Overseers said the cane absorbed screams, and Mara believed them. The stalks were tall, thick, and heavy, rustling like bodies shifting in their sleep. On the night the story truly began, the air was thick enough to chew. July heat clung to every inch of skin. Even though the sun had long since fallen, fireflies flickered between the rows, tiny sparks drifting like floating embers. Mara worked alone. She preferred it that way. Her husband, Jonah, had been gone for 3 months, killed by night riders who didn't like the way he stared them in the eyes when they passed. Jonah never bowed his head. For that they made him suffer. And for that Mara learned how to deaden herself without dying. She swung her machete mechanically, slicing cane stalks with smooth practiced motions. Thunk sh thunk. The rhythmic cuts kept her mind steady, kept the grief from crawling up her throat, kept the fury from spilling out. But that night, something in the air shifted. The frogs went silent first, then the cicadas, then even the wind withdrew. Mara's machete hesitated mid-swing. The cane held its breath around her. She knew that silence too well. It was the silence that always came before the Klan rode through. Her spine prickled. Her left eye, the one with the faint ember-red glimmer, twitched. Jonah used to joke that the devil kissed her there. Jonah had always loved to make her smile. A distant sound broke the hush. Hoofbeats. Several. Riding slow. Mara turned toward the treant. Pale shapes moved in the distance. White cloth drifting like ghosts. 10 riders, maybe more. Torches bobbing beside them, smearing orange light across the cane. Night riders again, but they were early. They usually came closer to midnight. She tightened her grip on the machete's wrapped handle. A voice hissed behind her. It was little Tilly, barely 13. Eyes wide with fear. They coming in. Overseers say, run up to the cabins. But no, Mara murmured. Cabins are the first place they'll go. Till's breath hitched. What we do? Mara looked toward the riders and felt something ancient stir in her chest. The same thing she felt the night Jonah died. But sharper now, more awake. We hide, she said. But not together. Not where the cane bends easy. Where then? Mara's ember eye glinted deep. Tilly ran, small feet barely making a sound on the soil. Mara didn't move. She watched the riders approach. Watched the torches flare brighter. Watched the overseer scurry like a rat, trying to warn them. They were coming for someone. Maybe many someones. Maybe for her. Maybe they didn't care who died tonight. But as the first hood emerged into the rows, something clicked inside Mara like a blade locking into place. She lifted her chin, wiped her palms on her skirt, rolled her shoulders back, and stepped deeper into the cane. Not to hide, not to flee, but to choose the ground where she would stand, the ground where the screams could be swallowed. And she could finally release the rage she had carried like a stone in her chest for months. Torch light flickered through the rows behind her as she slipped silently between the stalks, her machete glinting like a sliver of moonlight. The night riders did not know it yet, but by dawn their blood would water the fields, and Mara, quiet, patient, grief-forged. Mara would carve the beginning of her legend. The sun bled out along the horizon, staining the cane fields in streaks of red that looked too much like warning. The overseers always said dusk was the most dangerous time. Shadows long enough to hide in light dim enough to make a man unsure of what he saw. But that night danger did not come crawling into the fields. It rose from them. Because Celine was already waiting, she crouched between the towering rows. Her breath steady, her palms pressed into the soil she knew better than any map. She had worked these rows since childhood. She knew which stalks bent easiest, which ridges of earth carried sound farthest where the wind broke and where it swirled. The field was a body she had memorized, and tonight it was her weapon. She stroked the long cane knife lying across her lap, a simple tool meant for cutting stalks, but sharpened for war. Far out on the road she heard the first hooves. Slow, steady, arrogant. Klan riders never rushed. They liked to be seen like victims, to hear them coming and tremble long before they arrived. That was half the thrill for them. But tonight there would be trembling, just not from who they expected. Celine slid the knife into a sheath of braided cloth and crawled deeper into the rows. The rustling cane swallowed her whole. The riders reached the edge of the fields as the last daylight collapsed. 7 of them, hooded, armed, confident. The leader, a man with a voice like gravel dragged across metal, lifted a lantern and called out, "Field rats, come out." His words rolled into the dark like a challenge. The other riders laughed. Celine smiled. They thought they had come for her. They thought she was alone. They thought they controlled the night. But the cane fields whispered truths the Klan never cared to learn. That slaves did not survive by being weak. And they did not endure by being obedient. They carried pain in their bones and patience in their blood. And sometimes that patience burned out. Celine rose as silent as smoke behind the nearest rider. The man was turned away, his hood shifting as he scanned the dark. He never heard her step forward, never felt fear until the moment her arm flashed across his throat. A wet, surprised gasp. A heavy thud. His lantern rolled into the dirt, flickering like a dying star. The other riders jerked their heads toward the sound. What was that, Marks? You all right? No answer. Celine was already gone. A whisper through the cane. A shadow with purpose. The men dismounted, nerves sharpening. They spread out, lanterns high, guns drawn. They moved carefully now. No laughter left. Show yourself. The leader barked. Celine showed him silence. She came from the side this time, sweeping her knife low beneath a man's ribs. He dropped to his knees and folded into the soil. 2 down. Panic finally bloomed. Ambush. Who the hell is out there? Where is she? Celine slipped through the rows like water, every shift of leaf and snap of stalk guiding her. She worked quickly, precisely. Cut behind a knee, a slash across a throat, a strike so swift the victim didn't realize he was dead until he fell. The cane drank their blood quietly. By the time only 2 riders remained, the men were shaking hard enough to rattle their guns. Their lanterns jerked wildly as they tried to locate the ghost in the rows. I thought they said it was just a woman," one whispered. The leader's voice cracked. "She ain't no woman. She's a dam." He never finished. Celine stepped out behind him, grabbed his hood, yanked it backward, and slit his throat with a single motion. His lantern dropped, shattering, plunging them into near darkness. The last rider screamed and fired wildly, bullets shredding cane. He stumbled backward, tripped over a fallen horse, and crawled away on his elbows, sobbing. "Please, please don't kill me." Celine approached slowly, her shadow growing larger as the moon slipped free of the clouds. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The field spoke for her in rustling leaves, in the trembling earth, in the blood pooling around her feet. She stopped in arms. Length away. The man lifted his hands defensively, tears streaking beneath his hood. "Mercy! I'll never come back here. I swear it." Celine knelt and whispered the first word she'd spoken all night. "You already did." She plunged the knife. Then, silence reclaimed the rose. As she walked back toward the cabins, the moon lit her path. The fields behind her were still no hooves, no shouts, no threats. Only the cane swaying softly in the breeze as if bowing. Word of that night would not spread immediately. The Klan never admitted defeat, but whispers grew in the dark of a woman who moved like the wind and killed like the night itself. And soon enough, the world beyond the plantation would learn the name Celine. But the cane rose new at first. Morning came slowly, a pale, exhausted light creeping over the horizon, as though even the sun feared what it might find in the cane. The overseers were the first to discover the bodies. Stiff shapes scattered like broken scarecrows, horses wandering nervously, hoofprints gouged deep into the earth, the rows torn open where men had thrashed in their final moments. 12 overseers, 4 riders from a neighboring county, 5 well-known Klan men from town, 21 in total, 21 who had marched into the fields, believing themselves untouchable, 21 who left the world face down in the dirt. But none of that was known publicly yet. For now, the plantation trembled. At the slave quarters, a hush coated the air. Mothers snapped their children closer. Elders whispered prayers. Younger men stared at the ground with a terror that flickered between awe and fear. Celine sat on the steps of her cabin, her knife cleaned, her face unreadable. A thin scrape along her arm was the only evidence she'd ever been touched. Ada, the midwife who'd helped raise her, approached slowly. "Baby, what happened out there?" Sane didn't lie. "They came for me," she said, softly. "And they didn't leave." Ida's breath caught. "God Almighty." She lowered herself beside Celine. Her hands shook, but she placed one gently on Celine's. "But you done what you had to do, what any of us would have if we had your strength." Celine didn't answer. Strength had never felt like a blessing. It had felt like a burden, one she now knew could drown her or save her. Footsteps thundered toward them. Overseer Pike, thick-armed, reed-eat, sweating like he'd run to hell and back. He grabbed Celine by the shoulder. "With me?" The quarters went silent as a tomb. Celine stood without resistance. They dragged her to the fields where the bodies lay half-covered in morning mist. Flies buzzed thick around wounds, the iron smell of blood mixing with the sweet rot of crushed cane. Pike pointed. A trembling finger. This ain't natural. His voice cracked. One woman. Didn't do this. Celine said nothing. Who helped you? He barked. Tell me now. Met his eyes, calm as still water. No one. Pike slapped her hard, the crack echoing. She didn't flinch. Another overseer, trembling more than angry, whispered, maybe it was the devil. Pike spat. The devil ain't this clean. Circled Celine, whispering theories. A band of raiders, a runaway gang, voodoo. No tracks but the horses. No signs of struggle from her. Too precise, too. Celine listened quietly, almost detached. They weren't wrong. Explanation made sense to a mind trained to view her people as weak. The truth was an insult to their worldview. The lone slave woman had carved through armed men like a blade through cane. Finally, Pike grabbed her by the jaw. Tell me, girl. Tell me how you killed 21 men. Celine held his gaze and answered with the same calm she used when trimming cane one at a time. The overseers recoiled like she'd spit fire. Pike shoved her away, unnerved despite himself. Lock her in the smokehouse, he ordered, until Master Garrison decides what to do. They pushed her inside the narrow, pitch-dark shed used for storing smoked pork. The air was thick with old, fat and burned hickory. A single bar of light cut across the dirt floor from a gap in the boards. The lock clicked. Celine exhaled slowly. She did not fear the dark. She had lived in it, worked in it, fought in it. The dark was her ally. What she feared was still coming because the Klan did not leave 21 dead men unanswered. Retaliation would come like a storm, and she knew exactly who they would blame. Not the overseers for being fools, not the riders for provoking death, not the cruelty that birthed the violence. No, they would blame the field. Slave with a knife, and she would have to decide soon whether she would run, fight, or die. Late that afternoon, the sound of hooves returned. Dozens, fast, urgent. The ground shook beneath them. Klan riders, reinforcements inside the smokehouse. Celine closed her eyes. Had come to reclaim their pride, to make an example, to drown the fields in fear. Until every slave remembered their place. But fear had already changed sides. When the riders arrived, words spread through the plantation like lightning. Men and women gathered near the quarters, trembling, whispering Celine's name as though invoking a spirit. Are they here for her? They gone kill her slow. Or protect us? Or maybe she gone protect us? The last whisper was soft, but it spread a wildfire in the hearts of the desperate. Outside the smokehouse, boots stomped, chains rattled, voices argued. She killed our boys. She dies tonight. Master Garrison ain't here that we take her now. Open the door. Don't you dare open. That we make an example. Inside the darkness, Celine rose slowly to her. She flexed her fingers, rolled her shoulders, tuned her breath to the rhythm of her heartbeat. They were trapping her inside a box, but they were locking themselves inside a killing ground because the cane rose were not the only place she could fight. And before the night ended, the Klan would learn the same lesson the fields had learned. Celine did not fear them. They feared her. The shouting outside sharpened, voices layering over one another, angry, anxious, drunk with fear or vengeance. Boots scraped against dirt, metal clanged, hooves stamped. The smokehouse walls shuddered as someone slammed a shoulder into the door. Celine stood in stillness, her palms lightly touching the cold wooden boards. The dark was complete except for that thin, trembling line of sunlight along the floor. She watched it the way a hunter watches a rustle in the brush. The noise outside split the air. Break the damn lock. She killed 21 of us. Let her feel What pain is? No trial, no asking. She dies tonight. Celine heard another voice, pushing back one of the plantation guards. Maybe master said none of y'all touch her until he returns. A rifle but smashed into the guard. He hit the ground with a grunt. Celine inhaled. Slowly. The door didn't matter. The lock didn't matter. What mattered was that they believed they had already won. That they thought she was a trembling girl curled in a corner. They had no idea that the darkness fed her. The heavy, metallic clank. The lock twisted violently, then crack. Flip. The door swung inward. Torch light poured into the smokehouse, blinding and sudden. Celine didn't step. But she didn't cower. She let the light wash over her face as she looked up at the silhouettes crowding the doorway. Hooded riders, their white robes smeared with dust, their hands already gripping knives, chains, ropes. The first man stepped in, broad shoulders scraping the frame. Well, he sneered. Ain't so tough now. Are you? Sin said nothing. He lunged. She moved. Her hand shot up, gripping. His wrist twisting. The torch he held fell, flames licking the dirt. With clean pivot, she slammed his head into the wall so hard the boards groaned. He dropped instantly. The men outside roared, shoving forward. The doorway clogged with bodies. Celine snatched up the fallen torch, and then she smiled slowly, dangerously. You boys sure you want to come in here? One man spat. She's alone. She tilted the burning torch to the wall. And you're surrounded by wood soaked in pork fat. Realization hit them a split second too late. Fire wanted to live in that place. It leapt greedily from board to board. The smokehouse ignited like a dried tinder. The riders stumbled back in panic. Celine stepped through the doorway before the flames fully claimed it. Smoke curling behind her like a cloak. She moved into the open air, torch still in hand, her eyes catching the light with something otherworldly. The men outside hesitated. This was not the terrified captive they expected. This was a force. Get her! Someone shrieked. 3 men charged. Celine hurled the torch into one man's face. Flames exploded across his hood, sending him screaming to the ground. The second swung a chain, but she sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and brought her knee into his ribs twice hard. He folded. The third managed to grab her, pinning her arms. Celine dropped low, hooked his ankle, and wrenched. He crashed backward, and she went down with him, twisting until the chain on his belt slipped into her palm. In seconds it was on her feet with a weapon. Chaos erupted. More riders surged toward her. Others trying to escape the spreading fire. Flames licked up the wall, first raining down on their robes like burning snow. Celine whipped the chain through the air. Metal cracked against bone. It moved like wind between them, fast, controlled, calculating. Every strike was intentional. Every movement had purpose. The riders shouted orders. Surround her. Bring her down. Shoot her. But fear infused their voices. These men had spent years terrorizing others, but had no practice fighting someone who fought back, especially someone who did not fear death. Gunfire cracked. Celine ducked behind a wagon. Splinters flew. The horses tied nearby panicked, rearing and screaming. She sliced their res. If the Klan wanted chaos, she would give it to them. The horses bolted, plowing through the riders. Bodies scattered. Boots tripped. A rifle misfired, hitting one of their own. Shouts turned to screams. Celine used the distraction. She slipped out from behind the wagon and sprinted toward the cane rows. The canes swallowed her instantly. The riders followed, stumbling, shouting, tripping in the dark. Their torches waved wildly, their shadows bending and snapping across the stalks. Celine slowed her breathing, letting the rustle of cane hide her steps. She could hear them all around, but disorganized, disoriented. She's over here. No, I saw her go that way. Stick together. She did. Split up. Don't split up. They were unraveling. Celine crouched low and listened for the one thing she needed. A straggler, a man too confident to stay with the group. She heard him break off. To the left. Alone, muttering curses. She moved silently, her feet barely disturbing the dirt. The cane parted around her like it recognized its own. The rider paused only when her shadow fell over his torchlight. What the? The chain whipped around his neck before he finished the sentence. He thrashed, but she pulled him deeper into the cane, squeezing until he went limp. Lowered him gently and took his knife. Now she had what she needed, a weapon that belonged to them. The cane rustled. Again. More men searching. More prey that believed itself predator. Celine stepped deeper into the rows. Blood on her hands. Fire at her back and fury in every heartbeat. Tonight she wouldn't kill 21. Tonight she would kill all who dared to hunt her. And when dawn came, the cane would whisper her name for generations. Celine, the field slave who made death look slow. They had entered her territory now. The moon hadn't risen yet, leaving the cane field swallowed in blackness. Even the wind held its breath. The riders' torches flickered weakly, swallowed by the forest of tall, swaying stalks that towered over their heads like a living army. Sin could hear them tramping through the rows, clumsy, loud, stepping on dry cane leaves that snapped like small bones. The breath was ragged, their curses trembled, their guns shook in their hands. She didn't rush. She let their fears steep. The cane was her shield, her silence, her second skin. She knew every row, every turn, every hollowed-out path. She had walked these rows since she could walk at all. She could travel them, blindfolded. But the riders, they were like drunk men lost in a cathedral. The rider swung his torch, trying to see more than a few inches ahead. She can't stay hid forever, he muttered. No. Woman moves faster than a bullet. Another whispered shakily. Ain't no woman kills 30 men either. Pause yet? Here we are. Celine was already behind them. She ghosted between the cane with the stolen knife gripped tight. Her heartbeat was calm, almost slow. She waited for the moment when their bickering turned to distraction. Confess, you sure we shouldn't go back? And say what, master? We lost a barefoot girl. He'll string us up worse than she will. Celine stepped forward. A single motion. Silent, the knife slid across the throat of the man nearest her. He gasped, tried to shout, but only a wet choke came out. His torch dropped to the dirt. Celine caught his body before it hit the ground and melted back into the cane. The second rider turned. Jet, you hear some? The cane rustled. He lifted his torch higher. Nothing but shadows. Nothing but quiet. He stumbled forward, calling weakly. Jed, quit fooling. Celine stepped out behind him. She clamped her hand over his mouth. The knife sank into his ribs with a soft, final whisper. He twitched once and went. So, 2 torches lay dying in the dirt. Celine vanished before the others noticed the missing light. Further ahead, 5 riders gathered in a tight circle, arguing in low, desperate voices. She killed Williams too. We need more men. This is suicide. Just one woman. One woman who ain't breathin' like a normal thing. Shut up, barked the largest. A brute with a pistol tucked into his belt and sweat dripping from his hood. Fan out. Torches high. Guns ready. She ain't leaving these fields alive. Another man trembled. If she already left? A sound cut him off. A cracking between the soft, deliberate close. The men spun in all directions, raising their torches, but the light only made shadows, and the shadows only moved with more hunger. Celine watched from a crouch between the cane rose close enough to see the panicked whites of their eyes. Her breath was evener, knife steady, her body still as a coiled serpent. She waited until one stepped backward right into her reach. Her arm flashed out. The blade punched cleanly between his shoulder blades. It staggered forward, torch dropping, a broken sound escaping him before he collapsed into the dirt. What was that? She's here. She's here. Shoot. Shoot. Gunfire erupted blindly. Bullets tore through cane stalks. Leaves exploded. Men screamed, ducking from their own wild shots. Celine slid low to the ground, crawling under the gunfire. Ryder reloaded frantically, hands shaking so badly his bullet spilled. Celine rose behind him and slit his throat before he realized she was not the wind. Another saw her silhouette and screamed. She grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it into his eyes. He fired wildly, missing everything except the man beside him. Celine broke his wrist, knocked the pistol away, and drove the knife into his stomach. He folded over her arm. The largest man, the brute, backed away. Horrified. "You ain't human," he whispered. Celine stepped toward him, her face calm, her eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight. "You made me this," she said quietly. He fired. Dodged left, but the bullet grazed her shoulder. Pain flared hot, but Celine didn't slow. She lunged, kicking the gun from his hand. It spun into the cane. The brute swung at her. She ducked. He grabbed her arm and tried to slam her against a stalk, but Celine stomped his knee hard. He fell with a howl. Celine didn't hesitate. She kicked him again, this time in the throat. He gasped for air. Choking. "Please," he rasped. "Please, no." Celine crouched over him. "For every woman you dragged," she whispered. "For every man you burned. For every child you scared into silence. Never!" Her knife flashed. The cane swallowed his scream. When the last man fell still, the night returned to quiet. Smoke drifted from the burning smokehouse far behind her. Frogs croaked from the bayou. The wind finally breathed again. Celine stood slowly, blood dripping from her blade and staining her hands. Her shoulder throbbed from the grazing shot, but she ignored it. 21 riders had died before. Tonight added 12 more. But Celine felt no triumph, only purpose. Only clarity, because she heard the distant thunder of hooves, reinforcements coming from the next town over. White robes, new torches, new hatred. They were coming fast. Celine tightened her grip on the knife. She took one last look at the bodies lying among the rows. Their white robes darkened with blood, their torches dying like fallen stars. Then she whispered to the cane as if it were a friend, "Hide them." And the cane, obedient and ancient, began to sway, bending over the corpses, covering their shapes, burying their sins. Celine wiped her knife on her skirt and melted deeper into the fields. She wasn't done. Not tonight. Not until every torch stopped burning, and every man who hunted her lay silent among the stalks. By the time Celine reached the far end of the cane fields, the sky had turned a bruised shade of indigo. As a sickle slid out from behind the clouds and washed the riverbank in silver. It was quiet, too quiet, even. The insects sensed something moving in the air, something thick and dangerous. Then the silence shattered. Dozens of them coming fast. Celine ducked behind a stand of cane, pressing her palm to her wounded shoulder. Blood seeped through her fingers, warm, sticky, but the pain sharpened her thoughts instead of dulling them. She peeked over the tops of the stalks. 15 riders thundered down the road, their horses snorting clouds in the cold night air. Their white robes flapped behind them like torn wings. Torches bobbed like fireflies. They weren't drunk or careless like the earlier group. These were fighters, veterans, killers who had survived enough ambushes to trust neither shadows nor silence. Selene narrowed her eyes. They would be harder, but not impossible. The men reached the edge of the cane. The leader, a tall figure with a red sash across his robe, raised his hand. The group halted instantly. He turned in his saddle, lifting his torch higher. "You smell that?" he asked. One rider sniffed. "Smoke, sir." "Not just smoke." The leader murmured, "Blood too fresh." A murmur rustled through the group. "Bodies tracks." The leader pointed toward the cane rows. "In there." "She's in there." "She's close." Selene felt the stillness in the air shift like the fields themselves were listening. The men dismounted, leaving their horses trembling behind them. They formed a tight group, moving with discipline previous riders lacked. Each carried a rifle or pistol, grip steady, steps. Sure, but something in the cane stirred. Selene wasn't running. She was circling. A predator's arc. A silent, deliberate loop that tightened with every breath. They walked deeper. Shadows swallowed them. The leader raised his rifle, scanning left, right, ahead. "Out," he ordered. "Form pairs. Don't wander more than 10 steps from your partner." They obeyed. Pairs broke off in different directions. Torches floated away like drifting will-o'-the-wisps. The cane swallowed their light whole. Selene followed the two on the right. One held his torch high. The other clutched a double-barreled shotgun. "Think she's still breath?" The torchbearer whispered. Bodies back at the smokehouse looked fresh enough. The shotgun man muttered, "Means she's somewhere close." "Close?" The other repeated, voice shaking. "Belief." Snapped behind them. They whirled around, guns raised. Nothing. Selene was already under their feet. She burst upward, grabbing the shotgun barrel and shoving it aside as it fired, the shot exploding into the sky. The torchbearer screamed and swung his burning stick at her. She ducked, sliced the back of his knee, and he collapsed with a howl. The shotgun man tried to reload. Selene kicked his wrist, sending the gun flying. She grabbed him by the collar and slammed his head against a cane. Stalk hard enough to make him go limp. The torch flickered on the dirt. She stomped it out. Darkness reclaimed the two down. She moved again. Further left. 2 more riders heard the commotion. Was that a shot? Sounded close. Real close. They raised their torches. Selene snuffed the nearest one with a fist full of dirt. The rider swore and dropped his torch. Before he could reach for his pistol, Selene yanked him backward by the hood and slit his throat. The second man screamed and fired blindly, hitting nothing but cane. Selene rushed him. He managed to grab her arm, stronger than she expected. She twisted, slammed her knee into his ribs. Heard a crack. He wheezed and fell to his knees. She finished him with a swift, clean strike. The cane rose, trembled. For more torches flickered and died. And the leader realized something was terribly wrong. He shouted into the night, "Regroup to me now." Selene crouched low, blood dripping from her shoulder and wrists. She wanted them together, wanted them desperate, wanted them clinging to the illusion of safety. The riders stumbled back toward their leader, their white robes dim smudges in the moonlight. Counted 12 now. One limped. One was sobbing. One had blood dripping from his. So, we're being hunted. A young rider whispered. No, the leader growled. We're retrieving discipline. But his hands trembled. Celine stepped out onto the narrow dirt path between the cane rows. For the first time that night she let them see her. Moonlight washed over her face, her braided hair, the knife glinting in her hand. Her eyes were sharp, dark, unblinking. Her shadow stretched long across the path. Half the men stumbled back. Dear God, what? Whispered. She ain't bleeding right, another said. She ain't moving right. She ain't human. Someone else cried. Celine tilted her head. Softly. But you made me into something else. The leader snarled, lifting his rifle. Shoot her. 10 rifles rose. Trembling fingers tightened on their triggers. Celine inhaled. Then she dropped. Gunfire roared. Bullets shredded cane stalks behind her. She rolled, sprang up, and charged. By the time they aimed again, she was among them. The row erupted in screams. The leader fired point blank. Celine grabbed the barrel, forcing it up. The shot ripped through the air. She punched the rifle from his hands and smashed her elbow into his jaw. Gunshots cracked behind her. A bullet tore through her thigh. She staggered but did not fall. Pain sharpened her vision. She spun, slashing one rider's thigh and cutting another across the chest. Someone fired. The muzzle flash lit his terrified face. She ducked and sliced his wrist open, sending the gun spinning. The leader lunged with a knife. Celine caught his wrist, twisted, and headbutt him. It fell to the ground, dazed. 10 minutes of chaos. 10 minutes of screams swallowed by cane. 10 minutes of moonlight shining on bloodied robes. Then the field went quiet again. One man remained alive. The leader, Celine, knelt beside him. His robe was soaked in blood. Not his, but his men's. You killed 21 before tonight, he. And now, 34, Celine whispered. He stared at her, hatred flickering in his dying eyes. You'll die for this, he rasped. Celine leaned in. Close. I already did. The night your riders stormed our quarters. The night you burned Jonah alive. The night you laughed while my mother screamed. His face palled. You remember her? Celine asked softly. He opened his mouth. Didn't let him finish. The knife's final arc was silent. The cane rose swallowed his last breath. Celine stood slowly, wiping blood from her face. Her body burned with pain, but her steps remained steady. The night riders of Bay Hollow, every last one, lay dead among the stalks. She looked at the moon, at the road, at the horizon. They would send more someday. But not tonight. Tonight belonged to her. Celine staggered out of the cane fields just as the first pale threads of dawn began to pierce the horizon. The blood on her hands, her face, her clothes clung like a second skin, sticky and heavy. Her breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Not yet. The plantation lay ahead, quiet now. Eerily so. The cabins, the smokehouse, even the great cotton barn. Everything seemed to be holding its breath, as if anticipating what had just occurred in. The cane rose. She stumbled to the edge of the river that ran beside the fields. Water lapped gently at the banks. Unaware of the carnage that had taken place just meters away, Celine knelt and plunged her hands into the cold, cleansing water. She let it run over her face, over the blood, over the grit and mud, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine a world where none of this had happened. But the memory of screams, of ripping cloth, of the wet metallic smell of blood was burned into her mind. The night had not just been a fight. It had been a reckoning, and she had delivered it with her own hands. She rose, her legs trembling, and scanned the horizon. Smoke curled faintly from the remains of the torches that had lit the rider's approach. Cain's stalk swayed as if nothing had happened, but the earth bore witness in the flattened forms of the dead, hidden just beneath the veil of morning mist. Then she saw it, a small figure moving slowly along the edge of the riverbank, a child barefoot, thin and pale-faced, emerging from the woods. The boy had been with her during the earlier skirmishes, hidden while the riders fell one by one. He had seen her at her most merciless, had seen death dance in her hands. He froze when he saw her, wide-eyed. Celine knelt, extending her hand. "Come here," she said softly. "It's over." The boy hesitated, then ran to her, throwing his arms around her leg. Celine felt a strange warmth at the contact, a fragile reminder of why she had fought so fiercely. The night's horrors were not for vengeance alone. They were for survival, for the ones who could not fight, for the memory of those already. But hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and the shadows. Celine helped the boy to the cabins, checking for anyone else who might have survived, anyone who needed her protection. She found a few the wounded, the terrified, but none of the men who had terrorized them remained. But mid-morning, the plantation was silent, not in fear, but in a quiet awe. The surviving slaves moved cautiously, helping each other, tending to the fields, whispering her name. Celine felt the weight of their eyes upon her, not as accusation, but as recognition. She had become something more than a woman. She had become a force. Even the animals seemed to sense it. Horses neighed softly from the stables. Birds flitted uncertainly above, and the river's current whispered against the bank, carrying away the last remnants of smoke and fire. Celine walked slowly back toward the cane fields, now golden in the morning light. She paused at the spot where the last rider had fallen, knelt and let her fingers brush the soil. Pressed, she whispered, "May the river and the sun remember you, and let your names fade into nothingness." The boy tugged at her sleeve. "What now?" he asked, voice trembling. She looked at him, eyes hard yet gentle. "Now we rebuild. How we live." Word of what had transpired in the cane fields spread quickly, though no one outside the plantation truly understood. Stories grew wild, and strange whispers of a shadow moving faster than men, a woman untouchable, the spirit of vengeance incarnate. But Sen paid no mind to the rumors. Only for the lives still here, the children who had survived, the promise of a new dawn. Weeks passed. The river ran clear. The cane fields were tended once more, and the plantation began to breathe again. Celine trained the survivors, teaching them skills for protection, for stealth, for survival. Every swing of the scythe, every step along the dirt path was a lesson in resilience. One night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in streaks of crimson, Celine stood atop a hill overlooking the plantation. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and growing crops. But beneath it lay something deeper, the quiet hum of triumph, of justice, of a night avenged. The boy stood beside her, looking out at the horizon. "Do you think they'll come back?" he asked, small and unsure. Since eyes glinted in the dying light. "Perhaps, but we'll be ready. And if they do, they'll learn, as all must, that no one under the sun can take our lives without paying." A soft breeze carried her words across the fields, brushing through the cane, over the river, and into the still air of the night. Somewhere far away, the last vestiges of the night rider's terror seemed to shiver, as if the world itself recognized that a new order had risen. Celine turned to the boy. "Come, there's work to do and life to reclaim." "Phew." walked back toward the cabins, their shadows long in the moonlight, carrying the weight of memory and vengeance, yet stepping into a future shaped by their own hands. And as the moon climbed high, illuminating the plantation in a soft silver glow, there was a silence unlike any other, a silence of triumph, of survival, of a night that would never be forgotten. The legend of Celine, the most feared field slave in Louisiana, had only just begun. The morning after the storm of revenge, the plantation lay in uneasy calm. The sun rose slowly, gilding the cane fields with a honeyed light that belied the horrors of the previous night. Celine walked the rows, her boots pressing into soft earth, still damp from sweat and blood. Examining every stalk, every broken cane, every subtle trace of struggle, she moved with the precision of someone who had seen too much, learned too much, and survived by knowing that even the smallest detail could mean the difference between life and death. The boy followed closely, carrying a bundle of food and water, his eyes wide and weary. He had begun to understand in his own childlike way that Celine's power was not only in her arms but in her mind. Every glance she cast, every step she took was measured, controlled, purposeful. Celine knelt at a fallen stalk, fingers tracing the mud where a rider had struggled before falling into the cane. They were terrified, she murmured, almost to herself. And they should be. Fear is a teacher. The boy swallowed hard. Do you think more of them will come? She straightened, eyes scanning the horizon. There might be others. We'll hear the stories. The world beyond this plantation won't know mercy. But here we make the rules. Forgotten that a man's power is nothing against the will of the oppressed. She walked toward the edge of the fields, where the river curved like a silver ribbon. The water calm now, the reflections of the trees perfectly mirrored on its surface. Celine knelt again, letting her fingers trail in the water, washing the last remnants of blood from her hands. The river carried it all away as though the earth itself were a witness to what had been and what had been undone. Behind her, the boy fidgeted, glancing at the cabins. About the others? The ones who saw everything? Celine turned, her gaze steady. They will live. They will learn. And they will carry the memory of this night not as fear but as a lesson. Life here matters. Every soul is a weapon if we are wise enough to use it. A faint sound drifted across the fields. The flutter of birds taking flight, the whisper of wind through the cane. It was a soft, persistent reminder that life continued, indifferent to pain and vengeance alike. Celine stood, brushing the mud from her skirt. She scanned the horizon once more, noting the rising sun, the swaying cane, the silent cabins. Each detail was a part of the future she intended to carve. The future where no master, no rider, no oppressor could ever wield power over those who had learned the true cost of defiance. The boy tugged at her sleeve. Celine, well now. She considered him for a long moment, eyes narrowing as she traced the lines of the horizon, imagining the world beyond the river, beyond the plantation, beyond the reach of men who thought fear could rule. Now, she said quietly but firmly, we build, we prepare, we survive, and we wait patiently until the day comes when none dare challenge what we've reclaimed. As the sun climbed higher, Celine walked toward the heart of the plantation, the boy at her side. The survivors began emerging from the cabins, cautious but curious, watching her, waiting for guidance. Their eyes reflected the same realization. The night had changed everything. Their lives, their power, their understanding of who they were, it all had shifted irreversibly. Celine paused at the main path that led through the fields, turning to the group of survivors now assembling behind her. "Look around," she said. "This is ours. Every tree, every stalk, every inch of this land. We guard it, we protect it, and we ensure that nothing and no one will take it from us again." The group nodded, some with silent tears, some with fierce determination, but all with a growing understanding that the plantation was no longer just a place of. It was a fortress, a haven, a symbol of resilience and vengeance. Intertwined. Night fell again, but this time the darkness brought no fear. Celine stood atop a small rise overlooking the cane fields, watching the shadows stretch and merge with the moonlight. She remembered each rider, each moment, each heartbeat that had led to this silence. It was a silence heavy with history, with justice, with survival, but also with promise. The river whispered behind her, carrying the echoes of the night, the screams that had been, and the quiet determination of those who had survived. Celine's eyes, reflecting the moon's silver glow, were calm, but burning with a new resolve. "Let them come," she whispered to the moon. "Let the world test us. They will learn quickly what it means to cross those who fight, not just for life, but for justice that cannot be denied." The boy shivered beside her, both from the cool night air and the gravity of her words. Celine placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "We are ready," she said. As the moon rose high, casting its light across the swaying cane, the plantation lay under a watchful, unyielding gaze. The night belonged to the survivors, the defiant, to Celine, the one who had turned terror into power, fear into unity, and vengeance into legend. Somewhere in the distance, the faint rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of the river promised that the shadows of the past would never return to rule here again. This land, this life had been reclaimed. The legend of Celine, the most feared field slave in Louisiana, was complete. But her story and the memory of the night in the cane rose would echo forever.